Good morning, everyone. Big crowd. Look at this. Good to see everybody. My name is Chiquita Mullins Lee, and I'm here helping to facilitate the session today with world famous Patrick Ryan. Just a little bit about Patrick. He is the author of the novel Buckeye, an epic spanning 4 decades in the life of two families living in one small town in northwestern Ohio. His books include The Dream Life of Astronauts and Send Me. He is a graduate of Bowling Green State University's MFA program and lives in New York City. And is the editor and is the editor of the award-winning literary magazine One Story. And of course, we'll be signing books after this. So happy to have you here, Patrick.
Well, thank you all for coming. And should I just say a few words about how this came about? Do you want me to start that up? So I am primarily a short story writer. I cut my teeth on short stories, and I graduated from Bowling Green in Falcons. Falcons. Yeah, you can tell I'm not a big sports person. But
I think it's a yeah.
And it was 1990 I graduated, which feels like 5 minutes ago, but apparently it wasn't. And I started writing novels. I wrote my first novel when I was 20. Notice I'm not saying my first book, my first novel. I wrote, and I just continued to write novels after novel after novel, and I would send them around while I was writing short stories and publishing short stories, and didn't have any luck with placing these novels. But I was in it for the love of the craft, and I was just in it because I enjoyed it. And I figured out, took me a while to figure out, I was maybe in my early 40s, but I figured out I have got to let go of the dream of success or whatever we call that in order to keep going. Because it just doesn't make sense to keep doing this, like this will be the one, this will be the one. That just started to become senseless to me. And I thought, you just got to live your life, and you have to, there are plenty of seats up if you want to come up front. Make your choices. Try to be happy with your choices. And my choices were to keep writing and doing what I could do in my life to support that. All of which is to say, when I started this, it was with absolutely no thought whatsoever that it would even become a book. I thought it was the least likely thing that I would start working on because I didn't really know how long it was going to take. It was not under contract when I wrote it. It took me 6 years to write it to where I was ready to have my agent send it out. Just because I wanted to get to the end. And it's really important to me to put my best foot forward. And I know that that's really common pedestrian advice, but I just wanted to make sure that when somebody started turning it down, I knew that I was showing them the best thing that I could do, so that, and if they wanted to work with me, we were working with, that was our foundation, was my best effort at that time. So I started it in the summer of 2016, and I finished it, or I'm sorry, came out 2 weeks after I turned 60. So it was almost through my entire 50s that I worked on it. And it really was about the love of the stories. When I write, I don't really care much about plot while I write. I care about plot after I'm thinking about what I've written and I'm trying to shape it. And I'm kind of the same way, and maybe some of you are like this too. I'm kind of the same way with, as a consumer of books and film, television shows, I don't lean in and try to figure out the plot as it's going. I don't really care. I want to follow the characters and the storylines. And I want there to be a plot, but I usually don't even know what it was when I read a book or watch a movie until I finish, and I think, oh, right, that and that and that. So this was a lot of writing and then reshaping and going a lot of directions, excuse me, a lot of directions, and then just realizing that was not the right way to do that. And now I know that, and I'm going to set those pages aside. So there are probably around 300 pages of this book that never saw the light of day, but they were just cut scenes and things. I followed. I had dreamed of, since I was about 16, I had dreamed of writing, I don't know what my fill in the blank, my East of Eden, I don't know, my family epic. But I thought, I'm not going to do it until I get the right story, until I get something that I feel. And the right story for me would mean something that I could figure out the first half of, and the second half had some mystery to it, so that I could write toward figuring it out. And so that's what I got into with this story. And I realized partway in that it was going to fit into a couple of major themes that are important to me. I'll interrupt myself there just for a second to say that theme for me is like plot. I don't really care about it while I'm reading something, while I'm watching the film, and definitely not while I'm writing. I don't, if I thought about what is the plot of this and what's the theme of this, I couldn't write it, because then I will be writing toward that kind of thing. But something that's really important to me is the notion that forgiveness it's very crucial to any relationship, meaningful relationship that we have. It's going to come into play sooner or later in any relationship that we have that's going to last longer than a week, maybe. And it's complicated, and it's almost never one act or one decision. This is something I really believe in. It's like forgiveness can be 100 decisions a day that you just need to make, or it can be like marriage vows that should be renewed every once in a while. It's rarely something that you just decide you've forgiven and now you move on. It's something that needs tended to, and that's just really important to me, because I feel like a lot of relationships might have a longer lifespan, if that were something that we would keep in mind. And then the other thing is that I really firmly believe that while we're defined by our good deeds in life, we are also defined by what we do with our mistakes. And I've never could have gone into wanting to write a book about that unless it was a self-help book, or a memoir or something. But I realized about halfway into this journey that the story that I was working on was pursuing these things. And it was just all about following the characters. So I was in for the long haul. And then once I got a publisher for it, the first conversation with my editor, and this was after I say 3 drafts. It's hard for me to say because I rewrite constantly while I write. But I was definitely 3 full drafts in. And the editor, when I sat down to talk with her, the first conversation that we had, she said, I really think there's a lot of work to do. And I wanted to hear it. She's a legend. Her name is Robin Desser. She is legendary. She works by hand, old school, pencil and paper, famous for long editorial letters. You get your edit back, and here's the letter that accompanies the edit. Her letters on average were 11 to 12 single space when I print them out, single space, like documents that I would flag with multicolored flag, highlight and pick apart and analyze to try to make sure I was getting it all. And the letters had letters. The editorial letter had a letter. I'm not kidding. The letter had a hat. It was like the letter had its own hat. And the editorial letter was about 2.5 pages long. And that was all like, this is wonderful. We're getting there. This is so close. This is going to be so great. And there's a lot of work to, like, it was so the preamble, you know. So I would spend a day with the hat, and then I would spend a few days with the letter, and then get back to the draft. But it was what I wanted, because I wanted somebody who was going to read this whole story and figure out where was I dropping the balls, and where, you know, what about this great potential that just was not followed through. And sometimes she would say things and I would go, oh gosh, yes, yes, I forgot all about that character. You know, I forgot. And then sometimes it was about reeling me back, like saving me from myself. If you've read this book, there's a character named Casey LaGrange, and he's a minor character. He comes in one chapter. I think he appears at the end of one chapter, and he's gone by the end of the next chapter. And he comes in and he does what he needs to do for the story, and he's out. Okay, the draft that was acquired by Random House, this is just one example of what my editor sat down with. He came to town and never left. He never left town. He stayed until the end. He was in the last chapter. Why? I don't know. I didn't have anything for him to do. Like, it never occurred to me that I could bring him in and then get rid of him. So I knew he's just a resident now. And she said, I just don't know what he's providing. And so it was a good deal for him until I got in. And then I only had, I mean, as the writers in the room know this, that the best thing that you can do for your writing besides write is show it to a few trusted people after you put your best foot forward, and figure out, like, get their take on it, and listen to them. You know, like when they say, I don't know what this is about, you need to, like, pay attention to it. And I don't have many of those friends, just because I don't want too many voices in my head, because I really get concerned about what you think. And one of those is Anne Patchett. She's she's like my best pal. So she was really involved in just early discussions about the book, and then she read early drafts of scenes, and then I finally gave her the finished thing, and she read it, and she said, "Can we talk about Casey LaGrange?" And I said, "What? Isn't he funny?" And she said, "I hate him so much." And I said, "Well, I'm just going to put a pin in that, because I got other things I'm working on." And then I got my edits from the editor, and I called Anne and I said, "Guess what? You're not alone in the Casey LaGrange hate club." And I said, "But I don't know what I'm going to do." And she said, "He'd get him out of town." And so it's almost a scene that doesn't fit into the book if you've read the book in some ways, because it's kind of funny to me. It's kind of comical. This guy just gets hustled out of town. You know, they just, like, they basically dump him on the train and say, "You're on." And it was so freeing and so liberating to be done. But there were lots of scenes like that, and it got to a point where I really had to think about that best foot forward thing. Like, it is then becoming about trust, and I'm going to trust these other people to let me know. And it was the heaviest lifting I've ever done in my life. Oh, the other thing I'll share, and then I'll shut up, and if you have some questions, the biggest example of how revision will save you and listening to others will save you is maybe the second to last draft before the one that we really started polishing, that went to copy editing and stuff. It was still kind of bloated. It was still kind of, it did everything it did, but it just took longer to get there. And there was a character, a child in this book. Like Margaret and Felix are one of the two couples in this book, and they had two children for the longest time. They had a daughter who was born in the 30s, long before they ever moved to the town, and that daughter went all the way through the book And at the end of it, she's at, are we having spoilers in this conversation?
No.
Okay. She's all the way up into the last chapter. That doesn't spoil anything. And she was a major character. And I realized, oh, if I take her out of the book, that really does tighten things up in a way. And man, was it a lot of work, but it was absolutely the right thing to do. But that was just an example of some heavy lifting that went on late in the game where I had to say, I can't be stubborn about this. And it meant letting go, of course, of a lot of things. I tried to salvage what I could. And the one that comes to mind is there's a scene that to my mind is funny in the book. And it's just a tiny little scene where a child gets angry about a dead goldfish and throws it up into the air and you know the trajectory of this dead goldfish. It's just like it's one little paragraph. And I thought, okay, I will get rid of that character, but I'm not getting rid of that. I had to do it. And I ended up moving it to a different child in the book. And so there still is the goldfish. The goldfish fared better than Casey LaGrange. But that's a I'm not sure if I was supposed to make an opening remark or just chat for a while, but yeah, okay. So that was that's my foundation for this. Is it was a lot of heavy lifting, and I'm really happy that it worked out because I wasn't sure it was going to.
So it's a good foundation. So, and you've given us a lot of really good information about how you started and even going back into your earlier years and the whole process of writing and submitting and, what you do with your dream when you have to put it aside for a moment. But what would be your elevator speech for Buckeye?
The elevator pitch. The elevator pitch is that it is a story that actually spans 6 decades and 3 generations of 2 families who live in one small town whose lives become intertwined and compounded by one bad decision and then a whole lot of secrets layered in that shape them and end up shaping the generation to come. That's the elevator pitch. The building can only be so tall.
Exactly.
And no spoilers in the elevator pitch.
So you grew up in Florida and Ohio?
No, I grew up in Florida.
Florida and New York? You grew up in Florida?
Yeah, my father grew up in Fredericktown, Ohio.
Okay.
And his parents grew up in Fredericktown, Ohio. So that was deep Ohio roots. And my other parents were from Atlanta. My other grandparents were from Atlanta. And so to grow up in a lower income family in Florida meant that before 1972, there wasn't anything to do except go to the beach. After 1972 or 1, there was Disney World, but we could only afford to go to Disney World once every couple of years. So vacation meant the grandparents in Atlanta or the grandparents in Fredericktown. And Fredericktown, I mean, Ohio, growing up in Florida, Ohio meant snow. I remember being about 5 or 6 years old in our giant Pontiac, which was a station wagon, which was as long as this room, so huge. And we were driving up to Ohio for a vacation. And I was crazy for snow. I was the youngest, which meant I was in the middle, the back seat, and could never see out. And we were just crazy for snow. And then I heard my father say, "All right, everybody, that's snow." And he's doing this. And I'm like, wow, I can't see. We pull over. We were going through a town. We pulled over. The snow was this much snow. So it was left from what, 2 weeks ago. It was dirty, and we played in it. You know, so happy. Um, and Ohio also for me as a kid meant basements. Ohio had basements, and Florida had no. You would hit water if you dug. So the whole idea of being in your house and there was this thing under the house that I was crazy about it. And and then I went to graduate school in Bowling Green, so I lived there. And I got to know an area that I really got fond of. I got to know a little bit the Fort Clinton area and all up along the lake. And when I went to graduate school, that program took 5 people a year in fiction and 5 people in poetry. And the 4 people who were accepted with me, they were from different places. They all just couldn't stand it. Bowling Green. They were just like, this place, bleh, so stupid, train tracks. Bleh. And I was walking around just, and I was in my 20s and I was still like that little kid with basements. I just thought, I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I loved it all the time I spent in Ohio. I loved. So when I started coming up with this story, I thought, number one, I want to get landlocked. Just to change my thinking up. I want to get, and to me, this is very landlocked, and I wanted to write about a state that I had at least lived in for some time. I didn't want to just, Indiana. I've never been to Indiana. So I don't want to write a novel set in Indiana because then everything I'd be writing about would just be stuff I looked up, which this is, but at least, I had a connection and I'd spent time there. And so now I'm down to Virginia. That's all I have left for the next thing that I write, unless I want to, go back to one of the other states.
So I'm going to
Yeah.
I can project. So you have a lot of characters in your book. Which one or two presented a specific or particular challenge?
There is a character in this book who is a psychic medium. Okay. Let me just say, I don't really have a personal interest in going to seances. I don't know any psychic mediums per se. It's not necessarily my thing, but it fit for this. I went a few places in this novel that I didn't know I was going to go, and it's just because you get into the story and you go where you need to go. This novel ended up having a lot to do with PTSD and American soldiers coming home from the war. I didn't really anticipate that. It has to do with elements of social repression. I didn't really see that coming. Life on a cargo ship in the Pacific. Didn't see that one coming until I got there, but then I thought, okay, we need to do some looking up. The character of Becky, when I was coming up with her character, I knew that I wanted to give her an element that was unusual, and I knew I wanted it to have something to do with communication between the living and the dead, but I didn't know what that looked like. And for a short time, it was just going to be something that she firmly believed that she could do, and that other characters just kind of looked sideways at her. Because I knew I wanted something like that to be a source of contention in her marriage with her husband, and that it would bother her, that he couldn't just accept this. But what I hadn't decided right at first was that it would be real, that she could really do it. And as I was trying to cope with her character, and I come that far, and then I thought, I'm not going to set her up to be a source of ridicule for the whole book. That doesn't interest me. She's one of my main 4 characters. I'm not going to have everybody else in the book, except for the people in the book who believe what she can do, just kind of going, whoop, whoop. So I'm just going to say she can do it, and that it's real. And I'm not going to explain it because I don't understand it. She doesn't understand it in the book. I wonder if I can get away with that. I didn't know, but I didn't want to try to explain it. And so there aren't that, if you're turned off by this and you're thinking, maybe I should buy this book and maybe I shouldn't, don't get turned off by there are not a whole lot of seance scenes in the book. It's just something that's, an element that's riding along there. But it was really fun to just give her the ability and just to own it. And it's the only fantastical element in the entire book. Otherwise, the book is just extremely realistic, but that's this, you might call it magic realism. So it was really fun. It was fun to write her character, but it was a challenge because she is the odd person out. She's also the most comfortable with her own skin. She's the most comfortable person. She's the most confident person in the book, I think. She's at the good heart of the book. She's the least conflicted. But that was a challenge. The biggest challenge, though, was the character of Margaret. And I started with the idea for the character of her, but Margaret is a character who, not spoiling anything, Margaret is a challenging person. If you knew Margaret personally, you might find her a challenge. Just because the tools that she is bringing to life are not the same tools that most people tend to bring. You know, she didn't have a traditional kind of upbringing. And she was a challenge to write because she has a difficult personality. She has a difficult life. And a lot of it is because of the way she reacts to things. And one of my big interests in writing fiction, and something that when I teach, if I teach workshops and I tell students, is the key to writing characters who are going to do unpleasant things, maybe, or just things that you might totally disagree with, is that like what we would call villains never see themselves as villains. The big grandiose villains, the Joker sees himself as a villain. But most people that where you think, oh my God, that what a jerk, or what an awful person, or that's the antagonist. They don't see themselves that way, and that's what's interesting about reading about them, and that's what fiction can provide. And so there are some characters, not too many, but some characters in this book that do some things that I would never do, that might surprise readers. But the whole thing about fiction for me is that by the time you get to that point where the character is doing that, the reader, can at least see exactly what's going on in that person's mind, and can understand that in their mind, there's a reason to be doing this, or in their mind, there actually is no other choice. This is actually the best thing to do in this scenario, even though something you would never do. That's the fun of reading characters who you don't like. And the huge difference between saying, I don't like that character and I don't like that story. I think it's perfectly fine to not like a character. It doesn't mean that you don't like the story. I don't know. Yeah, that makes sense. But it's that distinction between wanting. It doesn't mean you have to want to spend the rest of your life with that character, but you are interested in spending a little bit of time with them to just sort of figure out what makes them tick. And one thing I realized early on when I was coming up with the scope of this, and I realized this is going to go into the second generation, and it's going to cover a lot of years. So it's totally new wheelhouse for me, is I had to figure out how to tell it. What was the best way to tell the story? And it couldn't be a first person narrator because no one character knows the whole story. And I didn't realize that until I got way in to thinking about it. I hadn't drafted it, but I had all of these notes, and I thought, the question of who could best tell the story, which character, is moot because no one knows it. Who knows it besides me? And then I came up with the answer, the narrator. Right? If the narrator is a third person narrator, then the narrator knows the whole story, and the narrator's and again, totally new for me from everything I'd ever worked on before. I thought, okay, I'm not the narrator then. I'm not the narrator of this book. I'm the guy who hired the narrator. I'll look at it that way. And the narrator knows everything. I think the narrator probably understands Becky's ability and just isn't telling us. But the narrator knows the entire story. And so the best way that that could work, I thought, is an omniscient narrator, which I'd never tried before. I'd never even tried it. I was so intimidated at getting it wrong, getting all these voices in your head. I never even tried it for just something I thought I'll never show anybody. I just want to see what it's like. But then when I would read these books, if you read Anne Patchett's Bel Canto, that narrator is just incredible. It's like a moth that just goes from person to person. And that book is all set in one setting of all these people trapped. And the narrator just threads through. And I remember when I first read that, I thought, oh, I wish I could do that. And when I first thought, oh, this should have an omniscient narrator, I thought, well, this would be such a good idea in someone else's hands. I really thought that. Because I was thinking maybe I'll just break it up into chat in like stories. Maybe I'll just knock it, just refigure it. And then I thought, that is pathetic. It is your idea, and you're thinking it would be so much better if someone else did it. What's going on with that? And again, what's the risk? Because it's something else I tell students. It's fiction. It's like it's not a patient on a table that might bleed out or flatline. It's fiction. It's like it's not like somebody's going to die if you don't get it right. Just try some stuff and see how it works. So it was just a matter of just stepping out on some limbs.
People readers going to take away from the
Yeah, I think it's what I said before. I think I really hope people would take away from it just the thought that forgiveness is complicated. I mean, I think we all know that it's crucial if a relationship is to continue. And by relationship, I mean anything, friendship, familial, anything. If it's to continue, forgiveness is crucial. We all know that. But I think acknowledging and keeping in mind that it is layered, and it's usually not a switch. That and then the other thing that I mentioned is just this idea that if you're thinking about yourself and your life, you're not just the sum total of your good deeds. You are also the sum total of what you've done with your mistakes, because who doesn't make them? To do anything, we have to make some mistakes. And I feel like everybody in this book, whether they know it or not, is engaged in the most important thing that we can be engaged in, where we're given one life, we have our time period here. What do we do with it? We try to become better versions of what we are by the end of it, and become better versions by interacting with people and just trying to extend some love. So that's what I would hope people can.
We've got 2 minutes, so we can either applaud for 2 minutes or have a 1-minute question.
Yeah.
Three of your characters fought in different wars, and I wonder if you had experience with a veteran in your family or veterans in your family.
Yeah, my grandfather, my mom's dad, not the Ohio stretch, the other one. He was a captain on an aircraft carrier in World War II, and his identical twin brother was a captain on an aircraft carrier in World War II, and they were in the war from the beginning all the way through, and were in the Pacific up to the end. Very, very kind, gentlemanly person who did not want to talk about it. And you almost wouldn't notice that he wouldn't want to talk about it because he was just so nice about that. But I couldn't get anything out of him. And my brother was old enough that there was a little bit of worry at that time that the draft was still going to be underway for the Vietnam War. That is my and I had an uncle who was in the Army in the late 60s and early 70s. but that's my closest connection. I had the pleasure of interviewing a nonagenarian World War II vet for this book, and that was to get stories about when he got his draft notice, what basic training was like, and then what the experience was like with the letters and the waiting. But when I was talking to him, and his daughter had brought photos, leave the photos out. There was a photo of him holding a monkey, and I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Oh, that's this monkey. We were in New Guinea, and there was a monkey, and the monkey hung out with us, and the monkey really liked me, and I was really fond of that monkey. And the monkey's name was Jamoke." And I said, "Okay." And I thought, that monkey's going in the book. One more. And the monkey is in the book. And he lived long enough that his daughter was able to read to him the passages that character, that Felix is in. And she said that he really enjoyed listening to him. And then he said, "How did he spell Jamoke?" And she told him, and he said he got wrong. So that's right in the book. I had time to fix the spelling, but that's where that monkey came from. And it may be the only instance in literature. I don't know where a monkey communicates from the afterlife. That does happen in a brief little part of it. Thank you so much. Come see me. I'll be hanging out there all the